What's going on, guys? It is the adult onset hunter back with another video. So today I wanted to talk to you about 5 common deer hunting mistakes that beginners make. As a beginner hunter myself, I can personally attest to making every single one of these mistakes myself, so hence my inspiration to make this video to hopefully save you guys the trouble the next time you guys go out to deer hunt. Mistake number 1 is not storing your firearm properly. This actually happened to me right before deer season last year. I had sloppily kept my firearm in the corner of my room, not in its case, for a few months, and what do you know, one day I was cleaning, I briefly knocked my scope just a little bit, didn't think it was a big deal. Got out into the woods the next day, saw a beautiful doe come in 50 yards from me, put the crosshairs up to the doe, squeezed the trigger. I thought for sure it was gonna be a done deal, and I missed. I was like literally astonished. I just was going through all of these different scenarios in my head about what could have possibly happened, and then it dawned on me, my scope was off. And it wasn't until I went down to the range to double check to see if my scope was in fact off. Sure enough, I took a shot at 100 yards and it was off by like a foot or two. So I highly recommend anytime that you're not using your firearm, please store it in a case, preferably a padded case, so that you're really not knocking that scope around. So I personally don't have a fancy case by any means, but this one right here just honestly works perfectly for making sure that my scope doesn't get knocked. What I do is I keep it in a case, and then I also, on top of that, keep it in my gun cabinet just to make sure that it's not getting moved around, knocked around. Because the last thing that you want is to miss your shot just because you did not take the precautions to keep your rifle tucked away in a safe place where it wasn't going to knock the scope. So moving on to mistake number 2 is not checking your rifle before deer season to make sure that it's on. If it's been a while since you've checked to see if your scope is on, there's a high likelihood it could actually be off. Maybe you knocked it, maybe somebody else knocked it, you didn't know. Just take the time a couple days before deer season to really make sure that you are in fact on. It's just a cheap insurance policy to make sure that you don't miss that deer. It might seem overkill, especially if you've stored your weapon properly, but I take the extra precaution now, and the day before deer season, I go down to the range, take that one final shot just to really make sure that my rifle is on. Mistake number 3 that beginners make, myself included, is wearing noisy clothing. Especially when it comes to your outer shell. A lot of times, because the outer shell is waterproof, it's some sort of a polyester blend or something that really just is super noisy. So anytime that you're moving around in the woods or even getting ready to take your shot, that movement can actually scare away game. So it wasn't until that I discovered wool, using it as an outer layer as well, I became a lot more silent in the woods. It was a huge game changer, so I really highly recommend, even for your outer layer, not just your undergarments, to invest in some wool clothing, because wool is incredibly silent and you can move a lot more freely without making any noise, instead of going with that sort of polyester material for an outer layer. The last thing you want is to see that nice buck come in, get ready to take your shot, and right at the last minute, just because you brushed your shoulder the wrong way, you make a loud noise and it spooks the deer just like that, and it's over. Mistake number 4 is getting too excited before you take your shot. You know, you've been calm for the majority of the day. You've been sitting there with not a lot of stimulus, and all of a sudden the moment that you've been waiting for is right in front of you. It's super easy to freak out. Don't get me wrong. You know, half the reason that I hunt, half the reason that you probably hunt, is because it is such an exciting thing to do. And it's not to necessarily take away from that, but it's just, how can you monitor your emotions and calm your emotions and still be excited, feel those butterflies, but not necessarily distract from your protocols, because you need to follow a very specific protocol. Right before you're about to take your shot, you need to have your checklist in place of what you're going to do, so you can still feel that excitement. And you don't necessarily need to suppress it, but you just need to control it. Bring yourself down, get grounded. You don't want to get tunnel vision. That's super easy. All of a sudden you're like closing in like this, there's the deer, you don't know what to do. Next thing you know, you're shaking. This happened to me last year. I did end up shooting the buck that I was freaking out about, but I had to change positions like 3 or 4 times because I just was not stable. I had my gun up to the deer and I was just shaking, and everything around me was just closing in, and I had to really just calm down, take a couple deep breaths, fall back on my protocols, raise the rifle up, put the crosshairs where they were supposed to be, and take my shot. So please remember to stay calm right before you take your shot, no matter how challenging it can be. Moving on to mistake number 5, this is a really critical one that you want to avoid, and that is not having a place to hang your deer or butcher your deer in the event that you actually shoot a deer. Now, this may seem incredibly obvious, but a couple years ago, I was super eager to get out in the woods on opening day, and I had everything else prepared. My rifle was on, I had my camo on, I had a good night's sleep, everything was prepared, but I wasn't actually prepared to shoot a deer. A lot of times, you know, we go out into the woods, we're hunting for days on end with no success. We often forget, what are we gonna do if we actually shoot one? And this was exactly the mistake that I made. It was opening day, and I went out there, and within 5 minutes, I actually shot a deer. And of course, I was not prepared with all of my materials to butcher the deer that evening. Because after all, I thought, well, it's opening day, there's no way I'm gonna get a shot. Anytime that you go out into the woods, you should be prepared to actually make a kill. It doesn't matter if you haven't had good luck for years, or it doesn't matter if you haven't had good luck for the entire season. You just never know what could happen that day. So get yourself set up with a place to hang your deer, get all your knives out, get all your gloves out, a nice little butchering station. It can be super simple. Just make sure that you're prepared so that you don't have to go and prepare all of that stuff after you field dressed your deer. That's just going to be exhausting, and it's going to end up taking you so much more time, just like it took me hours more than it should have to process my deer. I was up literally all night processing my deer because I just simply was not prepared. So think ahead and plan ahead, and I promise you will not regret it. All right, guys, I hope you remember these 5 mistakes that I personally made, and I hope that you don't make these mistakes the next time you get out into the woods during deer season. I am the adult onset hunter, but don't worry, I'm not the only adult onset hunter. I know there's many more of you like me out there. We'll see you next time. Signing off. Cheers.